You might think you're just financing a shiny new truck, or maybe that your country is just tweaking interest rates to keep things moving. But you're actually stepping into a system where debt becomes a very real trap. Let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to uncover the invisible forces that cause massive global economies and upper middle-class families to fall into the exact same financial black holes. You might think managing a household budget and running a sovereign nation have literally nothing in common, right? Well, actually, the math behind financial ruin is surprisingly universal.
Whether it's a household pulling in two high incomes but sitting with exactly $43 in their checking account at the end of the month, or a booming 1980s Japan crashing into a decades-long stagnation, the root cause is identical. We constantly look at high incomes or massive GDPs and just assume, oh, they must be wealthy. But as we're going to see today, income is not wealth. What really matters is margin.
Here is exactly how we'll unpack all of this. First, the illusion of prosperity. Second, the danger of leverage. Third, when the system breaks. Fourth, the power of margin. And finally, the wealth-building tax.
All right, Section 1, the illusion of prosperity.
Let's start with what prosperity looks like on the surface versus the actual mathematical reality underneath. Because honestly, so much of what we consider wealth today is really just highly subsidized debt. Look at these two neighbors. They make the exact same salary. But Troy is driving a brand new 2024 F-150 with a $1,000 monthly payment. The second he drives it off the lot, boom, he is hit with a depreciation cliff, losing 20% of its value immediately. Chad, on the other hand, he drives a paid-off used Camry. Now, on the outside, Troy definitely looks wealthier, but mathematically, Troy has about $14,000 to his name, while Chad sits on a $340,000 net worth. Troy didn't buy a truck, he bought an identity and financed it. Chad bought time.
And you know what's crazy? This perfectly illustrates what happens to entire countries. On a macro scale, Japan in the 1980s looked absolutely unstoppable. To fight off a recession, they cut interest rates down to 2.5%. Cheap, borrowed money absolutely flooded the system. Everyone, businesses, everyday people, just started wildly speculating in stocks and real estate. The illusion of prosperity got so immense that the land under Tokyo's Imperial Palace was valued higher than all the real estate in the entire state of California. But just like Troy's truck, it wasn't real wealth. It was just a massive bubble pumped up by cheap credit.
Which brings us to Section 2, the danger of leverage.
Both households and nations play a really dangerous game with borrowed money. They rely on a system of leverage that demands absolute perfection to survive. For everyday consumers, this leverage looks like something called the negative equity flywheel. It goes like this. People buy a car, it depreciates, and when they want a shiny new one 3 years later, they actually owe more than it's worth. So what happens? The dealership just rolls that old debt into a brand new extended 84-month loan. You literally have millions of Americans borrowing money for cars that lose value faster than they can pay them off. It's a self-perpetuating debt machine.
It's also what we call the two-income trap. Just look at this comparison. Back in 1973, a single-income family had relatively low fixed housing costs and a built-in backup plan. If dad lost his job, mom could enter the workforce. Fast forward to today, and dual-income families are using both paychecks to bid against other dual-income families for housing in good school districts. Then they pay massive childcare costs just to keep working. They make almost double the money but have zero financial margin. They are essentially conscripted to their debt. If just one person loses a job today, the trap snaps shut immediately.
Now, for economies, this exact same leverage looked like the unregulated shadow banking of 2008, where banks were bundling toxic subprime mortgages into complex instruments called CDOs and literally slapping AAA ratings on pure garbage. Or take Greece in 2001. To meet the strict criteria to join the euro, Greece used complex currency swaps orchestrated by Goldman Sachs to hide massive amounts of national debt off their balance sheets. Both families and nations were just using complex financial engineering to manufacture the appearance of stability. So what happens next? Section 3, when the system breaks.
The absolutely crucial question here is what happens to these highly leveraged systems when the music stops and a shock hits? Because leverage, well, it works great on the way up, but it is utterly merciless on the way down. Let's rewind to 1929. During the Great Depression, over-leveraged investors who had bought stocks on 10% margin were completely wiped out the second the market dipped. This triggered a massive chain reaction. People panicked, which led to bank runs that eventually destroyed a third of all American banks. The contagion spread globally, crippling European banks like Austria's Creditanstalt. A system built on maxed-out margin collapsed at the very first sign of stress.
When leverage fails without any safety net, the results are, frankly, catastrophic. When Japan's central bank finally raised interest rates, their bubble popped, leading to a lost decade of deflation and banks propping up zombie companies. In 2008, the U.S. housing leverage snapped, evaporating $19 trillion in wealth, that's trillion with a T, and costing 4 million people their homes. And when Greece's hidden debt was finally exposed during the financial crisis, they were forced into brutal austerity. Their economy shrank by 25% and youth unemployment hit an apocalyptic 58%. Bottom line, no margin means no survival.
So how do we fix it? Section 4. The power of margin. How do we survive these crashes and build unshakable security? It is all through the power of margin. Instead of falling victim to the resource curse when they discovered oil, Norway did something incredibly disciplined. They took their massive windfall and built a $1.9 trillion sovereign wealth fund. That is a staggering amount of money. And they enacted a strict rule to ensure they never spend more than 3% of that fund annually. They didn't inflate their lifestyle to match their new income. They built a permanent, unbreakable safety net for future generations.
Similarly, Switzerland turned itself into an absolute economic fortress. Surrounded by warring empires for centuries, they used strict neutrality to avoid devastating conflicts. They utilized direct democracy to keep government spending and taxes perfectly in check, and established an unmatched, high-trust banking sector with a super-stable currency. They essentially built a system designed specifically to act as a lifeboat during global storms.
On a personal level, this looks like Ezra and Lily. Remember that two-income trap we talked about a minute ago? Well, Ezra and Lily earn $170,000 combined. The bank happily told them they could afford a $700,000 house. Instead, they completely ignored the bank, bought a $380,000 house, and based all their fixed costs entirely on Ezra's income alone. Lily's income? That goes straight into investments. By intentionally living on one income, they essentially built their own personal sovereign wealth fund. If a layoff hits, they don't lose the house. They have total optionality.
Which leads us to Section 5, the wealth building tax.
Building margin requires you to actively choose to stop funding the illusions of the pseudo-affluent. It means choosing a wealth-building tax over the dealership tax or the status tax. When you actually look at the data on millionaires, the people who stay wealthy through retirement, they are absolutely ruthless about what they don't buy. Smart retirees secure their wealth by refusing to buy rapidly depreciating motorhomes that just sit in a driveway, or worthless timeshares with permanently rising fees, or high-fee variable annuities that really just make the salesperson rich. They completely avoid the country club trap. They refuse to bleed out their wealth through 1,000 small status purchases.
Let's go right back to Chad and Troy from the beginning. The actual monthly payment difference between the average new car buyer and a used car buyer is around $393. By choosing a used car and automatically investing that $393 difference every single month, Chad built a $147,000 account in just over a decade. Wealth isn't the flashy truck you see on the street. Wealth is the invisible $147,000 quietly compounding in the background.
I want to leave you with this exact quote because it honestly defines this entire concept. The car you drive isn't the cost. The car you don't buy is the wealth. Every single dollar that doesn't go into a depreciating asset or a status bidding war for a house you don't actually need or a fake national accounting trick becomes a dollar that buys your long-term freedom. Margin is exactly what gives you options when the inevitable global or personal shocks arrive.
So as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself, looking at the choices you make every month, are you using your money to build freedom, whether it's for your household or your country, to actually weather the storm? Or are you just slowly losing it through the illusion of convenience, constantly just one crisis away from the trap snapping shut? Because the math, as we've clearly seen, absolutely does not care about our illusions.